Good evening, New York 14. My name is Mabel Cho. I am a caseworker and field representative from the Office of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you for joining our monthly town hall. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you are logged onto the Zoom platform, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. When you are asking your question, please mention who you are and which neighborhood or city you're from. Alternatively, you can email your questions to aoc.townhall@mail.house.gov or call 718-662-5970. Our staff is available to support with any technical difficulties. Our team members will be monitoring the inbox and phone. We are also live on Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's Facebook and YouTube channel. So please feel free to visit our respective Facebook or YouTube pages for the live stream. Closed captioning is being provided by All Hands in Motion. If you click the link in the chat, it will take you to a website where you can view the transcription. If you require Spanish translation, please click the languages icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen and choose Spanish to access the Spanish language audio feed. Please know you may also submit your question in Spanish. In a few short moments, we'll hear an update from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Following her remarks, we'll open it up for Q&A from constituents. After the Q&A, there will be a press gaggle where members of the press can pose their questions. Now, it is my honor to introduce the representative of New York's Congressional 14th District, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you so much, Mabel, y por todas nuestras, todas nuestras familias que están aquí en la llamada. Si necesitas traducción en español para este Zoom, haga clic en el botón del languages o idiomas en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione español para acceder el audio en español. También puede submitir su pregunta escrita en español por medio del chat. So we're making sure they're trying to get as many languages and accommodations as possible. And for anyone who's trying to instruct or help someone access this town hall in Spanish, just click on the interpretation button right down here if you're in the Zoom, and you just click on Spanish and it'll take you to the Spanish language translation room. That being said, thank you all so much for joining us here today in our monthly town hall. As we say, and as I said at the beginning of last term, I pledged to offer at least once a month town hall to all of our constituents. And I'm thrilled that we have been able to keep that promise even during COVID and during the transition to so much digital content, which we're doing nowadays. So thank you all so much for joining us. We're extremely excited to be holding this town hall, and this town hall is going to be a little bit different than our other ones. For those of you who have tuned in to our other town halls, they are usually centered on a theme so that we are able to ask questions and really dive into the specifics and the mechanics of each individual issue. I still, in our office, still thoroughly intends to continue that practice, as it has been extremely helpful, and it's allowed our community to really dive in depth in many different issues. But today we are doing a more general and all-encompassing town hall, because I'm sure many of you have questions that may not fill in one specific bucket or another. And so one of the things that we're taking a look at is allowing the opportunity here today for you all to be able to ask and discuss a wider range of issues, kind of a a catch-up town hall or a general bucket town hall that we're going to be doing today. So that's what we're going to be kind of pursuing. One thing that we wanted to do, I wanted to start off today with some quick updates and remarks on where we're at right now. And so I'll move on to what we have going right here at the present moment with COVID. It's extremely important that our community is caught up on the current situation here, both in New York City and in New York 14, our congressional district. And so here is the latest update. As many of you may have been seeing and may have seen, COVID is in just an absolutely unprecedented resurgence throughout the entire country. And sadly, New York is no exception. There are parts of our district that are now deemed in the yellow zone for increases in COVID cases. Those are primarily Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, LaFrac City, and Corona. So if you are in around that area, and even in surrounding areas like Woodside, I would just say to definitely exercise extreme caution in your daily actions and behaviors. And frankly, this doesn't just apply to our folks in the yellow zone. This should apply to our entire district and our entire city. And so that means if you are in the yellow zone, however, if you are in Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, Corona, or LaFrac City in our district, here are the current areas of guidance that are right here on this screen. One is houses of worship and communities of worship. Houses of worship for now may remain open at 50% of maximum capacity. Again, this is yellow zone guidance. You may know or may hear different guidance if it transitions to orange or red, and there may be other communities that are already in orange or red, but this is the guidance for our community. Houses of worship may remain open at 50% of maximum capacity. Secondly, any gathering in general, non-essential gatherings, it says here must be limited to 25 people. We just got revised guidance today that is actually lowering that. So essential gatherings must now be limited to 10 people maximum for both indoor and outdoor settings. And any individual who encourages, promotes, or organizes mass gatherings may be fined to up to $15,000 per day. Again, this is state guidance that we want to make sure that you all have. This is the guidance that's coming straight from the state. Thirdly, all businesses in our yellow zones may remain open, but they must follow COVID-19 requirements for their specific sector. So the same requirements that you saw as we were reopening, as small businesses figured out if they were in that phase 1, phase 2, et cetera, and you saw those specific requirements for your sector, again, you must adhere to them. The fourth area is dining, and indoor and outdoor dining at the present moment is currently allowed. There is a 4-person maximum per table. Again, this is the state guidance. I would exercise elevated levels of caution. Personally, if you have to dine out, I would encourage opting to dine outdoors. But again, the state guidance is currently this. And lastly, when it comes to schools, at the present moment, the guidance today that we have in our office is that all New York City public schools and non-public schools may remain open. Testing guidance was issued for the state last month, and those protocols should be adhered to. And I think what's really important for our community and for all of us to understand is that we are in this together. If we do not pitch in and do our part to contain the virus, it will grow out of control, and we will find ourselves on the precipice of a potential shutdown situation if we don't do our part. And so that is why this guidance is so incredibly important. If you can, please make sure that you are exercising, just really increased vigilance. Make sure that you're distancing. Don't get fatigued in your mask wearing. Please make sure that it covers your nose, because if we start to get too lax in this very, very, very delicate moment in the city, we could end up right back to where we were. And we do not want this to happen. We want to avoid a shutdown as much as possible. But with the virus starting to spin out of control, if we don't do our part, then we're going to end up back in that place. So please take this guidance seriously. Please get tested regularly. If you have any doubt at all, please know that your ability to get tested has nothing to do with your current health insurance status. If you are uninsured, if you are undocumented, you can get access to a COVID-19 test, no questions asked. So secondly, this moves into our second part with our guidance. The additional guidance from the state that we have. Again, this is guidance from the state that restaurants, bars, and other SLA licensed entities must close in-person service from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Indoor and outdoor gatherings at private residencies must be limited to 10 people. These new rules will be effective this Friday, so tomorrow at 10 p.m. And again, we have to get back. If you, be mindful of your habits, make sure that you're going back and that you've continued, or if you've kind of slacked off a little bit, don't worry, we won't tell anybody. Just get back to washing your hands very extensively and rigorously. 20 seconds, please avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. If you can, if it is available to you, please consider getting your flu shot. I just got mine in Corona at our community health clinic, Plaza del Sol. They did a wonderful, phenomenal job. I can't speak highly enough. They also do their flu shots outside as well, so you do not have to worry about staying indoors. But get tested as well. If you already got your flu shot, or if for whatever reason that is not available to you, please make sure that you get tested, particularly if you are, if you feel like you have been exposed, or if you have any question or doubt about your exposure, get a test. There are plenty of testing options that you can easily look up. And again, please be as rigorous as possible about wearing masks. It is one of the most effective tools that we have, but it's only effective if we can get at least 80% of our population wearing it properly. That means above our nose and covering our mouth. So that's the guidance that we have here. And per the city recommendations, I just read the state recommendations. The city recommendations that we have is overall, it's very difficult to say this, but if you can, please reconsider any potential holiday travel. It could very much exacerbate the situation, and please make sure that you are planning your holidays safely. Again, keep in mind that guidance for gatherings, there is no guarantee how long that this gathering cap will last, because really, it depends on how much we all buy into it. And the longer it takes for us to all work together and meet that standard, the longer we're going to have these, these safety provisions in place. So I know it's quite difficult. A lot of us have gone a very long time without seeing family. I've gone a very long time without seeing my family, but one of the ideas that we're doing is that we are circulating the same recipe. And so we've all agreed to cook the same recipe and then share our meal over Zoom. So we're all eating the same meal. I encourage each and every one of you to get creative and to celebrate, to indeed make sure that you celebrate, but please do so safely. But yes, please find creative ways to socially distance. to socially distance through the holidays. And you know, it's a very difficult time for all of us, particularly for those of us who, you know, have been impacted by COVID deeply in one way or another. And you know, very sadly, what we're hearing from many health officials is that, frankly, the pandemic has a very real possibility towards peaking this winter, more than we have seen ever before in the country. And I do not say this or share this to make sure that anybody panics or anything like that, but it is to add urgency to you know, it's to make sure that we are very urgent about taking safety precautions and going back to some of those safety protocols that we were taking before. Please take care of yourself, take care of any elders in your life, any seniors in your life, and please don't take any risks. Don't take any risks if you can. Try to be as safe as possible as we, you know, are experiencing this national uptick. And that is what makes the holiday travel advice come into play, because we are starting to see spikes, and there are already some parts of the country that have maxed out on their hospital beds. And the more that we travel and the more that we think that we are an exception to this, the more trouble we'll be in, and the harder it will be for the virus to contain itself. So let's not let it get out of control, and let's make sure that we are advising that whether you are in a yellow zone community or not, please be as safe as possible. That being said, I think we want to move on to our general Q&A. And so I'm happy to turn it over to Mabel to help facilitate some of those questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, for your powerful remarks. Now we will move on to the Q&A portion of our town hall. As mentioned earlier, constituents signed on to the Zoom platform may submit your questions on the Q&A feature on our platform. So please mention where you're from and what city and neighborhood you are from when you ask the question. Our team members will be assisting in answering questions. Remember, you can submit your question in Spanish. Also, a reminder to the members of the press that after the Q&A, there will be a press gaggle where you will be able to pose your questions. So our first question is from Anthony, who is a registered nurse living in Jackson Heights. And his question is, a COVID-19 vaccine will be available soon. How do you plan to ensure New York's communities that are most at risk for poor health outcomes, for example, the homeless, the incarcerated, uninsured immigrant populations, receive equitable access to distribution?
So I want to make one thing very clear, and that is that we are fighting to make sure that the vaccine is free. This vaccine should be free to every single American and to every single person in our country, regardless of your status, whether that's your insurance status, your immigration status, your financial status. The only way that a tested and vetted and successful vaccine can actually work is if we get as many people to partake in it as possible. So I think one of the things that we should really focus on is to use our testing model almost as a model for vaccines. And that means that it is free to any person that needs one. no questions asked. You will be given a test, and it should be the same way with a vaccine. And we are working to get that commitment from as many. We're working to secure that commitment when a vaccine is ready and when it is responsibly when it is responsibly ready to administer. And lastly, when it comes to our frontline communities that have been hardest hit, I agree in that we lower both the financial barrier and we should lower the structural barriers, whether it is the same. And again, we can use testing as a model for this. Right now, no matter your history, no matter your status, you are able to walk into a community health clinic. You're able to walk into any number of facilities, no questions asked, and receive a test. And I do believe that we should be modeling our vaccines on that, both in terms of the financial model and the distribution model. So that is something that I can assure that the House Democratic Caucus and that the House of Representatives in general is very, very committed in making sure that we have an equitable distribution and one that is not financially out of reach.
Thank you. The next question is related to the Affordable Care Act, and it's from James in Queens. He asks, what is the current status of the ACA with this new justice in the Supreme Court?
So right now, and I believe the argument started 2 days ago on November 10th, hearings and arguments were currently being heard in the Supreme Court, but we do not know what the final ruling is. Now, with the most recent appointment to the Supreme Court, if I am not mistaken, Amy Coney Barrett is hearing this case. And she will, if I am not mistaken, have a vote on this case. And so again, there's no telling what may or may not happen, but because the arguments are currently being heard right now and we have no additional information at the moment. But this is why this is why I have long felt so passionately about passing more comprehensive healthcare legislation. And it's why I personally support Medicare for All. Because, we are at such a delicate point with the ACA, and it very well may be with a 6-3 Supreme Court, if that does not change, that we may have a court that dismantles much of our healthcare policy and our access to healthcare in the United States. And so that is why we have to make sure that we continue to push and counter on the legislative front to make sure that we pass policy that guarantees healthcare as a human right to all people in the United States.
Our next question is a census-related question. John H. Prince Jr. from Parkchester asks, will there be an opportunity to correct what is perceived to be an undercount in 2021 before they start the redistricting process?
This is an incredible question, so thank you for asking it, Mr. Prince. We have to investigate the actual rollout and execution of the 2020 census, and there's some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that, and this should be no secret to anyone, the Trump administration worked very, very hard to make the census as difficult as possible for communities like ours. They were playing games with this citizenship question, which eventually was tossed out, but the insistence on it and the messaging around it and the intimidation around it really prompted a lot of our communities to feel that the census was not trustworthy. And as a consequence, many people did not fill out the census because they were scared that they would be attacked for their status, even though the citizenship question was able to be tossed out. Secondly, there were constant changes in administration of the census. There were transitions to digital questionnaires. Some communities were being mailed their paper censuses on a different timeline. And we also had the shortened count period, shortened to October, I believe. And that's about a month shorter than many people were anticipating. So we had a shorter timeline with a more difficult process and a lot of confusion and intimidation about what questions were going to be asked and what would happen if you didn't answer those questions. So there are absolutely plenty of concerns about how the census was administered and the potential for an undercount. That's the bad news. The good news is that we worked very, very hard to overcome a lot of those obstacles. And I'm one thing that I think is good, is that good news, is that the city, the state, and ourselves here in our community invested overtime where the federal government did not. And we were actually able to match our 2010 census count. Julie Menon of the New York City Census Bureau reported that successful result. I can't help but wonder what our census count would have been if we didn't have those obstacles and also had that enormous investment. And so even then, even with that number being our reporting number, being able to match our reporting number in 2010, I still believe that the potential for an undercount is absolutely there, given all of those previously stated variables. And so what we are looking into is how the census was administered, whether it was administered ethically, and we are currently going to try to investigate any large scale or systemic injustices in the administration of the 2020 census. And we have to see where that investigation takes us, and we have to see where the facts lie. But there is, potential, I believe, as a member who sits on the oversight committee in the House, I believe that there may be a potential, if we find something very deep and very systemic, to see if there's any way that we can make up for those inequities. But again, we have to let these investigations bear out and see where they go.
Next, we have a question from Cambry Cruz, who is the owner of QED in Astoria, Queens. They say, my theater art space has been closed since March with zero indication of when we will be able to reopen, with no metrics provided. Meanwhile, my full rent, utilities, annual business license fees, etc. are all due. What can be done to relieve rent for small businesses, particularly those businesses which have not been able to reopen in any capacity? Thank you for your service and representation.
And of course, and I'm just so incredibly sorry. I just want to say that to start, in it's just a terrible situation. And in our city, some of the venues that some of the businesses that have been hit hardest have been our venues. Restaurants and many small businesses, while we aren't back by any means to 100% or to where things were, at least many of our restaurants are able to open with social distancing standards in place and with outdoor dining. But many of our venues, our theaters, etc., have been completely shut down since March. And it's been extremely frustrating in the House, trying to champion both rent and mortgage relief to everyone that needs it in the country, and allowing the power of the Fed to cover many of those losses, and to have that be obstructed by a Republican Senate has been devastating. It's been devastating for not just our community, but it's been devastating for the entire country. And it's just shocking that even for the most selfish senator who wants to help their own state, we aren't able, they aren't able to find a way to support rent and mortgage relief and cancellation. And so anyways, I think that one of the things that's going to be really important is to make sure that we aim for that. I do believe that the federal government has the ability to back rent relief and mortgage relief for those folks that need it, especially for our small landlords that have been also quite challenged with tenants, whether they are small landlords for businesses or small landlords for mom and pops. We have to make sure that we cover mortgage relief and that we cover rent relief, because it is simply unsustainable for businesses and individuals to have just a huge balloon payment due in 6 or 8 months. And we want even less for businesses to move out or vacate, especially locally owned ones, especially beloved institutions like QED. And so, one of the things that I can pledge to you is that we're working extremely hard to make sure that we get a rent relief and essentially a rent and mortgage bailout for both small businesses and families in very desperate need. Now, with our new president-elect, the opportunities for that are opening up greatly, and we will also have to see where the Senate lies as well.
Our next question comes from RL from Pelham Gardens. The question is, can you give us any updates on the stimulus? I can't stress enough how much the March stimulus meant to us, not only as individuals, but as small business operators. The trickle up effects cannot be stressed enough.
Thank you. Sorry, my seat's falling here. So I have championed monthly stimulus payments to folks in the country, everyone that needs it, since the pandemic has started. I was really, really hoping that we were going to be able to cut a deal before the election. And it seemed for a while there that we were on that path, on that negotiating path between both Nancy Pelosi and the current White House to be able to negotiate a second stimulus check. And we thought it was going to happen, and at the very last minute, the rug was pulled out from under us. And now we are in a very dangerous moment where President Trump has no interest in helping the American people. His urgency behind passing a stimulus prior to the election was, I would say, entirely predicated on his reelection. And now that the election is over, it seems as though he has no urgency to help everyone in this country. And Mitch McConnell is very much in the same boat. And I hate to be saying these words right now. It's unacceptable. And so many of our families are in need of this check. I believe that families should be getting monthly checks, especially working class families, especially families that aren't wealthy, which is the vast majority of families in our country. And right now, there's just no urgency on the Republican side. But before the election, Mitch McConnell had indicated that he wouldn't do anything. And so right now, we have one out of our three current bodies that are interested in passing a second COVID relief package. It seems as though House Democrats are pushing for it. We continue to re-vote for secondary stimulus packages that include second, third checks. And they it just doesn't go anywhere in the Senate. And one of the tricky issues in particular is that, at least in the negotiating position prior to the election, the only thing that Republicans would negotiate it for potentially is to completely waive liability from all corporations, like a large corporate liability waiver. Now, the reason that this is so dangerous is because this liability waiver is essentially a waiver that will allow big businesses to put workers and allow them to expose COVID to their workers and not face any retribution or lawsuits afterwards. And that is extremely dangerous. And that was an area where the Speaker of the House had put her foot down, because a $1,200 check, they're trying to make people choose between their life and the present desperate moment that we're all in, and it's criminal and it's wrong. It is my hope that Mitch McConnell is able to find some sort of urgency or desire to make sure that we can get stimulus checks out to everybody. But if it was up to me, and what I have co-sponsored legislation to do is to co-sponsor monthly stimulus checks to working families across the country.
Thank you. The next question is Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. We are counting on you to hold the Biden-Harris administration accountable on bold progressive initiatives, including climate change. What is your plan of action for doing this? The future of the species depend on urgent major action.
Thank you so much for your question. Thank you for your urgency, because you're right. I think even in some of the hubbub going on this week, I've had people kind of call in and say, hey, are you okay? You've been really kind of taking it from the party. And what I've kind of been sharing actually is that I feel very centered and at peace, because this is what you all sent me to Congress to do. You all sent me to Congress not to just beat up on Republicans all day, as fun as that can be, but you all sent me to Congress to hold all our institutions accountable and to hold a lot of the brokenness of Washington to account. And that includes the Democratic Party. And for 2 years, it has felt as though we haven't been able to hold our own party to account because of the larger looming and existential threat that Donald Trump presented to our democracy. And now we are starting to shift. We have had our election, and I don't know who expected me to stop working and stop holding people accountable just because Democrats are in charge, but they were sorely mistaken. And so, to your question, how do we hold any administration, including this upcoming administration, accountable to climate change, and what is our plan? As many of you know, I am an inside-outside organizer. And perhaps that is why sometimes some folks in the Democratic caucus get a little upset at the bullhorn that we've developed. But that's because we need to have urgent action on climate change. But I do think that we're starting off with very good news. One is that I can't even say vice president anymore, our president-elect, which is wonderful to say, our president-elect, Joe Biden, invited me to have a seat at the table this summer as we developed our Unity Task Force policy plans. And right there in the task force, both the president's team and our team agreed to a plan. Was it entirely his plan to begin with? No. Was it entirely my plan to begin with? Also no. But what we were able to do was expand President-elect Biden's climate plan by orders of magnitude. And we really made it drastically better and on a scale where we are actually starting to do something to stem the impacts of climate change. And so now we have this agreement. President-elect Biden has already agreed to this course of action. He has adopted and endorsed this course of action. And that is step one, and it is a very significant step. It means that we now have agreement on numbers, on scale, on carbon drawdown goals, on plenty of other goals as well, including environmental justice goals. And now the task that we have is to hold them accountable to this agreement and make sure that President-elect Biden keeps his word. And in terms of how I plan to do that, as some may or may not have seen, I have been vocal about the transition into this administration. And we have to make sure that we push for and encourage and really, cheer on and campaign for a cabinet that will allow Joe Biden to keep his word with these policies that we have all agreed on, particularly the ones on climate. And so we are very much encouraging those picks. We are not kind of allowing this to just be a quiet, closed door process, but we are advancing our preferences and making our requests known. And it is extraordinarily important that we do so. This has usually been the period of time where Wall Street and lobbyists kind of flood the gates and try to come in and bat down the door. And we cannot allow that to happen again. In my assessment, I think that's a big part of what happened in 2008. And it set up for the disappointing Wall Street bailouts that could have been structured better towards working people. And so I would say that if you want to help in that process, then one way that you can help is by also using your voice. It matters. And such a core part of what we have done and what we have said has been about reassuring you all how important your voice actually is. And sometimes I think your voice is just as important as mine, because for you to speak as an everyday citizen of this country, you have nothing to kind of gain. You have nothing to gain except, a better world and a better community. And so I encourage you to also speak up and use your voice and say what you want. But right now we are focused on a transition that will appoint individuals that will ensure that Vice President-elect Biden keeps his word on the Unity Task Force.
Thank you. The next question is, do you think there will be a peaceful transfer of presidency with the attitude Trump is demonstrating?
Well, this is a huge question. And when we talk about peaceful, we have to really break down what that means. And to me, I already believe that President Trump is already stoking the flames of violence, as he has done for several years. We saw even with the ballot counts that were happening in Philadelphia, his rhetoric and his attacks on our institutions and our systems very likely inspired a group of what seems like domestic terrorists to attempt to attack where ballots were being counted in Philadelphia. And that attack, thankfully, was intercepted and interrupted by public servants in our country. But there is no doubt in my mind that he has incited violence. And the longer he continues to deny reality, the more he is going to disrupt our society. And that's just the fact. That's just the fact of the matter. I am extremely, extremely disturbed and concerned by the wave of dismissals that we have seen and resignations that we have seen in defense, in the Department of Homeland Security, and frankly, just all across the administration. It is extremely concerning. We are trying to get as much information as possible about this wave of dismissals, but it is not an encouraging sign. And right now, the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, doesn't seem to want to acknowledge the results of our free elections. And it is selfish, it is weak, it is reprehensible, because what all of these individuals are doing by not acknowledging the results of our election is that they are putting their selfish interests once again ahead of our country. And it is sad to see how deep this cowardice goes, and that there doesn't seem to be many Republicans anywhere that will stand up to President Trump on anything. And it seems as though they're just waiting until he comes after them to say something. And it's quite sad, and I think that it is unbecoming, and it is a weakness of character that no person should have if they seek to serve this country.
Thank you. The next question is, congratulations on winning a second term. What are your plans for the next 2 years for your district?
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm so excited to be able to talk about this. You know, we are really, really burrowing in on some major areas that we want to move forward on. What is wonderful is that we've spent the last 2 years or so drafting many pieces of legislation that now have a fighting chance of being enacted in this upcoming term. And so, you know, to describe some of the work that we've introduced in this term and some of the things that I'm looking forward to us getting a hearing on or having a fighting chance, you know, very early on, we presented the Loan Shark Prevention Act, which would cap interest rates from credit cards and other predatory lenders at 15%. So essentially making usury illegal in the United States, and allowing and really making sure that people just aren't getting fleeced, frankly, to an unethical degree with interest rates that are just simply unacceptable and wrong. And so our Loan Shark Prevention Act that we had introduced caps interest rates at 15%. Another piece of legislation that we had introduced was to recalculate the poverty line in the United States, and basically to recognize real poverty. And what that does is that it will allow a lot more people to access assistance. The current poverty line is still based on a formula that takes the minimum caloric requirements of food requirements times 3, and just take that number and you multiply it by 3, and that is essentially the calculated poverty line in the United States. It does not include the cost of childcare. It does not include the cost of modern utilities. It assumes that you have a stay-at-home spouse, essentially, that not only does full-time childcare, but also cooks your meals, etc. So we have that. I'm looking forward to making sure that we expand healthcare a great deal in this country. You know, President-elect Biden does not agree with Medicare for all, but I do believe that we can work with this administration to, at the very least, dramatically reduce the enrollment rate for Medicare, to make sure that we invest in Medicare deeply, that we expand Social Security, that we allow COLA, the cost of living adjustments, to be generous and to be reflective of true costs of living, and that we actually restore the ability for people to get back up on their feet, especially now and especially during this time. And of course, you know, I think the most urgent matter of business is making sure that our district's priorities are included in any COVID package that comes up, especially after President-elect Biden is seated. And so all of this is extremely important. Of course, we've got the Green New Deal on deck, and I deeply look forward to making sure that we really truly jumpstart. That we really truly jumpstart our investments in climate, and that includes, you know, a $2 trillion climate plan that was agreed to by President-elect Biden, that includes includes investments in disproportionately impacted communities, which includes ours. You know, we have East Elmhurst, and many of our families that is absolutely a frontline community. Many of the emissions that come off from a LaGuardia airport flow right over that community of East Elmhurst. Many people believe and have called areas and pockets, Cancer Alley, etc., or Cancer Boulevard. There's so many kind of euphemisms throughout the country, and it's indicative of how much we have. You know, we have a toxic Superfund site right here, you know, by where Sunnyside Yards is, and I think it is absolutely imperative that we not only decarbonize, but that we also really take a look at the communities that are disproportionately impacted. And I'm happy to say that we have early indications from a Biden administration to help us address those issues.
Thank you. The next question is from Egley from Pelham Parkway. Many people are losing their homes or being evicted due to not being able to afford their mortgage or rent because of the virus. Are there any steps being taken to combat this, such as people getting a loan from the government to pay their rents?
So if I'm not mistaken, Mabel, the eviction order is currently in place here in the state of New York, correct? Okay, yeah. So I just want to make sure. I know we have these like deadlines that had kind of been extended. So the eviction moratorium is still in place in the state of New York. So step number one is that if you know someone who is being harassed or whose landlord is trying to evict them, know that that is illegal, and make sure that you call your city council member, that you call our office. We'd be happy to connect them to the appropriate authority, but it is not legal to evict in the state of New York right now due to the pandemic. And so if you know someone that is being subject to that, it is not legal, and it is and it will not be legal, I anticipate, for some time as we enter the winter. And so there is currently an eviction moratorium in place. That eviction moratorium has not been lifted. And so if there is someone that is trying to subvert or push people out in the middle of a pandemic, that must be brought to our attention because it is not in accordance with the law. Secondly, in terms of mortgages, you know, again, I believe that we need to have a mortgage bailout on a federal level so that people are not contending with these enormous balloon payments and losing their homes. And these were issues that we have kind of brought up even in the March CARES Act. These were extremely important issues, and we have to make sure, because frankly, the state does not have the piggy bank to do that. The federal government does. The federal government does have the power to protect people from foreclosure, and by allowing these mortgages to and taking on a lot of the liability of these missed payments with these mortgages. And I cannot stress enough, and I want you all to know that I will be pounding down the door of both the Democratic House and the Biden administration to make sure that many of these benefits and many of these things that we are fighting for are also retroactive. So it's not just that, oh, we're going to get something right now, and this is going to be the rule moving forward, but that we're going to try to get as much retroactive assistance, because right now, what the Trump administration did was that it balanced this pandemic on the backs of you guys. It's balanced the pandemic on the backs of working people and everyday families, and said, we're not going to do anything about rents. We're not going to do anything about mortgages. You all figure it out. It is not up to the American people to figure out how we're going to move through the devastating impacts of a pandemic. That is why we have a government, and that is why we elect people like myself or any other representative to figure it out. And so I believe that we need to take back a lot of that liability that was put on working families over the last 6, 7, 8 months. And we need to make sure as much of these benefits are as retroactive as possible. And so those are the things that we'll be fighting for. I do believe that the Biden administration truly takes this pandemic seriously. I believe that they understand the severity of not just the medical crisis, of the actual issue of the virus. I am confident that they don't just see this as a biological issue, but that they also see this as one of the most devastating developments economically, and one of the most devastating economic events that we have had since the Great Depression. I anticipate that they will govern as such. I can assure you that I will push them to govern as such, because it's not fair, it's not right, it's completely dehumanizing, and it is morally wrong how this government has handled this pandemic.
Thank you. Next is, I am a constituent from Astoria, Woodside, 11103. Anti-Semitic hate crimes are rising in New York. Will you commit to the meetings with Jewish groups that were discussed at the beginning of your first term? American Jews appreciate and support the work you are doing and would feel safer knowing they have your support and representation as part of your progressive, active, and diverse base. Thank you.
Of course, thank you so much for this question. I'm happy to meet with these organizations. For context, we prioritize, and I prioritize meeting with our constituents and constituents and requests from our district. And so I am happy to say that, and I'm proud to say that I have met with Jewish organizations and Jewish communities throughout our term, but those organizations have been from New York's 14th Congressional District. Now, with the organizations that said that they have not been able to meet, they were organizations from outside of our district, which is why those meetings were deprioritized. And in our first term, with just the volume of requests that we got from our district, I had to put our community first. But that being said, I absolutely am looking forward to, in my second term, meeting with some of those groups just outside of our district, including the ones that you brought up, and And, that's the first order of business. But the second order of business that you have brought up is the absolute surge in anti-Semitic hate crimes in not just New York City, but across the country. And it is disgusting. It is wrong. And it is just part of a very disturbing increase in hate crimes that we have seen in this administration. And we are going to have to get back to a place of healing. And what I mourn is that this kind of hatred, as we all know, is very easy to let out of the box, but it is so much more difficult to put back in. And so we're going to have to do an extraordinary amount of work to make sure that we fight back against anti-Semitism, along with many other hate crimes and surges in hate crimes that we've been seeing, but particularly what we've seen throughout the city and with anti-Semitism in particular. And so, I know that and I hope you all consider me a partner in that. I'm actually meeting with some more Jewish leaders in our community tomorrow, actually, and I'm greatly looking forward to that. And we also are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Jackson Heights Jewish Community Center right here, and so we're actually I'm going to be reading a congressional commendation in the center's honor, I believe in just a few weeks or perhaps just a few days when we reconvene. And so I'm deeply looking forward to reading that commendation into the congressional record and taking some of those initial steps to make sure that we build our community and are there for our Jewish neighbors and family.
The next question is from Shane, who lives in Woodside, Queens. He asks, does President-elect Biden have a plan to help the children separated from their families at the border? Thanks for everything you do.
So thank you for this question. And I can also tell you as your member of Congress that sits on the oversight committee of the House of Representatives that I will not stop working until we get justice for each and every one of those children and these families. We are committed to reuniting every single family that we can. But I will not say that it is going to be easy. And I cannot promise that it will be easy. I cannot promise that it will be simple, but I can promise that we will, that we are going to do absolutely everything in our power, in our capacity to reunite these kids. The Trump administration, not only to communicate how severe this problem is, the Trump administration not only separated these children, but ICE and CBP in many cases did not accurately document their parents when they separated them. And ICE and CBP did not accurately preserve the records of every single one of these parents after they separated them from their children. And ICE and CBP deported a lot of these children's parents while keeping their children here in what I believe is state-sanctioned kidnapping. And I also believe that child separation at our border will be remembered as one of the most heinous acts of any administration that we have seen in modern history. It was a large mass-scale human rights violation, and the destruction and the potential destruction of records makes it even more heinous. I think about these kids a lot. And, as many of you know, I went to the border last year. I was in these facilities myself. And the trauma that went on is unspeakable. And the conditions that these people were held in are unthinkable. And the violence that they were subjected to is un-American. And the thing about justice in this situation is that we can't just reunite these kids. We have to do as much as we can to try to repair harm done. And I think that is also going to require us perhaps creating an expedited path to citizenship for these families, or perhaps we have to consider guaranteeing health care to these families, at least to them, to start for the enormous amount of trauma and psychological damage and physical damage. I mean, this administration, we are starting to see we already have whistleblowing reports that they performed non-consensual hysterectomies on women. And so justice is going to be a struggle because how do you make that right? How do you make that right? And you can't make that right. But we can do everything that we can to try and to get close. And I can promise each and every one of you all, especially as a member that sits on a committee of jurisdiction, should I be re-granted that committee, which I hope I will, that committee of jurisdiction moving forward, that I will not let this go. Thank you.
Next is, I'm in your district in East Elmhurst, and I have a general question about the House. And why did we lose so many seats? And what needs to be done to get them back next term?
So, of course, the loss of the House majority is just extraordinarily upsetting to all of us. It's upsetting to all of us who are invested in having a Democratic majority so that we can expand healthcare, so that we can raise wages, so that we can protect working people. And it's also personally very difficult because to lose these people, many of them are my colleagues, and I'm proud to call many of them my friends. And the idea that they may not be returning next term is or that they aren't returning next term is extremely difficult on both just a personal and a policy and a political level. Why did we lose these seats? It's very early to tell. And I don't think that there's any one reason why any person loses an election. I usually tend to think that it's compounding reasons, unless, of course, that member, if there's some scandal or revelation. But usually it's not any one reason why a given candidate loses an election. And so I can't say this is why or that is why, but I at least think that we can point to some contributing factors. And again, we won't know for sure until we have a lot more data in, until the results are not only certified but studied. And many of those results are in the process of certification, but they have not been studied. And so all of that is just a disclaimer to say that this is not the end all or be all, but I have some thoughts that I've shared over the last week to consternation. But listen, the fact of the matter is, if we don't get better, we're not going to get better. And getting better requires honest and blunt assessment. If we're not honest with ourselves about our failings, then how can we correct them? And so, in my opinion, there are very tangible ways in which the Democratic Party can be better. And I think a lot of that has to do with our organizing. And I believe, frankly, that our community is a model for the country. And people may roll their eyes and they may say, oh, those are just a bunch of liberals in a deep blue district. They have nothing to offer anybody else. But I disagree. First of all, I think that there's a deep misunderstanding of our community and our district. Prior to my election, many people from previous representation, many people would have thought that our district was highly moderate, and that it was much more conservative than what it actually was, based on how previous administrations and previous seats had. But our community is a community of organizers, and it's not like this granola hippie college town. As you all know, we don't have a college in our district. And I think perhaps because of my age, people think that I represent, I don't know, a college town or UC Berkeley or something. But we know that Queens and the Bronx are intensely working class, hardworking, diverse communities. And a lot of the work that has to be done has to be on championing our policy and having a clear message and not running away from who we are and what we believe in. And every member in every district is very different. Even, people also lose different races for different reasons. But I do think that we can be much, much better in our messaging, in our mechanisms, in who we invest in, and really looking at how we even run these campaigns. Because as many of you know, there are some campaigns that are excellently executed and other campaigns that aren't. And I think we have a lot of room for growth there.
Thank you. So next we have our last question. And Congresswoman, may you also offer some closing remarks so that we can end this part of the program. So the next question is from Lauren, and she's 14 years old. She asks, many people have different definition when it comes to defunding the police. What is your opinion and plan on that matter? Thank you for all your work and the hope you give me for the future.
Thank you so much for asking this question. And I'm always so thrilled when we have young people joining our town halls. So here's what I think. First of all, it's important for us to understand where these decisions are made, right? And so there's much to be made about how defunding the police has been an electoral issue, but defunding the police is not up to Congress. Defunding the police is up to city governments and states. And so, even when we talk about defunding the police being a campaign issue in congressional races, it also means that there was a very fundamental lack of political education that had gone on. But to answer your question, what I think it means to me is that I believe that the path towards justice is a long arc and that it happens in steps. And I believe that this call, for me personally, is a step to build a world where we are safe in more than one way. And that safety is not just an officer with a badge and a gun, but that safety is also a mental health worker that shows up when you're in crisis. Safety is making sure that you are not evicted from your apartment in the middle of a pandemic. Safety is making sure that when you go to school, you have all the resources that you need, and that the school down the block has all the resources that they need too, so that we don't start to develop coping mechanisms that ultimately hurt our communities at large. And so what does defund mean to me? And for me as an elected official, by the way, this whole conversation is about me listening. So this term defund, when my constituents and my community is out in the street heartbroken over far too many people who have been killed due to police violence. And when my community is coming out and saying and demanding this, it's my job to listen. And so, what I think in this term, and in terms of the steps that we have to make towards justice, is that we need to invest a lot more in those other kinds of safety. Because, and again, this is a city issue, but it is one that I'm free to be honest in my opinions about, although I don't have a vote over, is that our budget is too high. We have a $6 billion NYPD budget that goes up to $11 billion when you include other NYPD related expenses. And that is more than our city spends on housing, healthcare, and one other critically important issue combined. And I think that it is becoming a bit, sometimes these investments get to a point where they become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where, not even 3 years ago did we have a $6 billion police budget. Not even 5 years ago did we have a $6 billion police budget. And I have to admit that it's quite saddening that in this national conversation, it seems as though to many people, and to the way this conversation is playing out, is that defunding schools has been seen as a matter of course, but defunding the police in order to fund other areas has people going apoplectic. I think this is right now in its current step of justice. I think that this is about a budgetary shift, and that budgetary shift was presented, and we have not made that shift yet, and we need to make that shift. We need to have counselors instead of cops, in having such a heavy presence in some of our schools, so that our kids and our young people just get used to being policed from a very, very young age. And I don't think that that's healthy. And this is not to say or disparage the work and the community building work and the changes that many people have made in our efforts towards public safety. But I think it is to say that we need to stop being so reactive to the cries that we are hearing from the communities that are being killed. And we have to listen to it. And we don't have control. It's not my job to control activists. It's my job to listen to the community, and that is the current interpretation of what I've heard, and how those policy demands have been solidified. And I will continue to listen to our community, because I'm sure that that conversation will evolve, as all conversations do over time.
We would like to offer one correction, and that is related to the eviction moratorium, known as the State's Tenant Safe Harbor Act. And it's only limited to residential tenants if they are suffering financial hardship during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Please see the chat box below for links to resources for tenants. Okay. So next, we're moving on to the press gaggle. If you're a reporter and you would like to ask questions, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and state your name and outlet in the question field. Reporters who are selected will be unmuted so they can ask the question to the Congresswoman directly. So we have Erin Durkin, who would like to ask a question.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm just wondering, as you know, Max Rose conceded today, so Nicole Malliotakis will be joining the delegation as the only Republican in the city delegation. She focused a bit of her campaign on going after you. I'm just wondering, what impact do you think her win is going to have in the delegation? Have you spoken to her at all, and sort of what's your reaction to her winning?
I have not yet spoken to her, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't honor Max Rose's service in Congress. He was just an incredible colleague, and he and I drove each other crazy, but we were also good friends. So I just kind of start off with that. I'm not sure. She's if she made a big deal about me, I certainly didn't hear it. So I'm sure that was something that she did in her community or her district. I wish her well.
Next, we have Bridget Bowman with roll call.
There we go. Hello, thank you very much. Congresswoman, I wanted to follow up on the question earlier in the town hall about Democrats losing House seats. You mentioned there's more the party can do on organizing, and I was curious if you've talked to any of the D-Trip chair candidates about this, if you've decided who you're going to support for D-Trip chair, and if you have had any conversations about how the party can organize better moving forward.
I have had some conversations with some of those folks that are interested in taking over D-Trip, and one candidate coming right here from our state, Sean Patrick Maloney. So I have had some very early conversations. I am encouraged that there has been some interest since I've communicated some of those weaknesses that I've seen. And so, I think in a shift for the caucus, there's some listening going on, which I think is very encouraging. I have not formally supported any candidate yet, but I am encouraged in that overall shift.
Thank you. Sorry, just to follow up on that really quickly. You said you had some conversations. Have you talked to both Congressman Cardenas and Congressman Maloney about this?
I've talked to Congressman Maloney on a one-on-one level, and I was on a Congressional Hispanic Caucus call where, as a caucus, Congressman Cardenas also had a conversation, and we kind of addressed each other's concerns.
Next, we have Hunter Walker with Yahoo.
Hey, Congresswoman, how are you? Thanks so much for doing the gaggle. This is my first Zoom gaggle.
Welcome.
I saw last night you had tweeted about the news about Ron Klain, and you said it was, quote, good news and an encouraging choice that he was tapped to be Biden's chief of staff. I'm wondering what makes you feel that way? What do you find encouraging about him? And then also, do you have any insight into who they might name as a climate czar and who you might like to see in that position?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons why it's encouraging is, and I will be very frank in my analysis per usual. We'll see if this gets me in trouble, but I don't know. But I think for folks my age in particular, that came of age during the Obama administration, my very first vote that I ever cast was for Barack Obama. I was 18 years old. And I think how many young people experience that moment as is, this incredibly inspiring movement that it took to elect President Obama. And I think what had happened was that there was this very quick shift after a successful election, which was this huge dumping of cold water, which happened during that transition period. And there very much tends to be a tension between corporate and lobbyist influence and grassroots leadership, and also just kind of straightforward, less influence, less Wall Street influenced selections. And I think we saw kind of an era where a lot of folks who worked in administrations past and folks from Citibank and Wall Street kind of flooded the transition period. And I think for a lot of people our age, we saw how much that limited the political imagination and possibilities of an administration that we had voted for the political administration, imagination and possibility. And so I think the reason why Ronald Klain is such an encouraging pick is that a lot of people who are dealing and very scared from having seen that happen once is scared of it happening again. And there is a tension, as there is with every administration, by the way, regardless of party, between these more Wall Street lobbyist-driven picks and more grounded in experience, not just grassroots or progressive picks even, but picks that are less colored by the influence of Wall Street. And so I believe that Ronald Klain is a pick that is encouraging because I think that he is extraordinarily competent. He led our country through the Ebola crisis. He has led through many different political crises. He is not an ideologue, which is not to say, it's not to say that he's an ideologue in either end, but I think that people are encouraged because I think he'll listen, like in an authentic way. And that is a quality that runs pretty short in Washington. And to have a listener and to have someone whose case you feel will be authentically heard is very encouraging to many people. And I think that's also why he was such a profoundly unifying pick. And you had folks across the spectrum finding that pick encouraging. As for a kind of a climate pick, we're still, I don't have a particular name in mind, but I think there have been some grassroots organizations that have put forward some really great names on climate. I think there's quite a few. And I do believe that President-elect Biden it takes this issue very seriously, and I'm looking forward to kind of working among some of those very qualified names put forward.
Thanks very much.
Of course.
So the last question to wrap up the press gaggle is from Alexander Nazarian from Yahoo.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to get your sense of the influence of Wall Street and how destructive that could be potentially for the Biden administration, because there are a lot of big tech and big law folks on those transition teams. And I just wonder how concerning that is to you at this point.
About big tech or
yeah, like big tech and big law having people on those transitions. I've been talking to Justice Dems today and others, and they're concerned that agencies like OMB could be really kind of taken over by those. And I don't have to tell you how important they are.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely think that there are large concerns. I'm very concerned about the role that Uber executives would play in this administration after we saw what happened in California with Prop 22. And, not all big tech and not all of these tech figures are the same, but what I am going to be looking for and what I am concerned about are picks from big tech that will pose an incredibly damaging role in labor rights and impact on labor. Our district here, New York 14, we are a district of cab drivers, which includes yellow cab medallion drivers and app drivers. And, you know, these app companies have made very public that they want to roll back the labor protections that they successfully did in California and bring that nationwide. So I'm very concerned about that with respect to labor. I am extremely concerned about the influence of big tech in antitrust and the administration's positioning with antitrust, because many of our problems that we have right now is because we have monopolies. We have monopolies, and there's a huge effort from big tech to just try to pull the wool over our eyes and make it seem as though they aren't a monopoly, but many of them are, and many of them are engaged in behavior that I think should absolutely be subject to antitrust action. And I am extraordinarily concerned about a potential damaging role that they could play to working people. But there aren't any specific picks yet. I haven't, dug into this super closely yet. So that is something I will be keeping an eye out for.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for your insight tonight. And this wraps up our program. Thank you, everyone at home, for spending time with us tonight. And I wish everyone a happy and safe Thanksgiving.
Thank you. See you all next month.